So what we're going to be doing today in this video is, now that you've got the wires and everything bent, now we're going to be ready to apply the acrylic to the model and make the retainer. First, what you have to do though is you have to use a product called Alcoat. There's a couple of different brands out there. It's really important that you use this, because if you don't, that acrylic seeps into the model because it is porous, and it will make for a very ugly looking retainer that will really not fit well, but also will be pretty gross after a few months for the patient, as stuff builds up on those particles of gypsum from the model that get embedded into the acrylic. So you just liberally apply the Alcoat onto the palette, and I usually run it up onto the occlusal surfaces of the teeth, just because you'll have some of the acrylic get up onto that and you want it to come off nice and easy. So I put a nice gentle coat on there, but then I don't want any pooling. So at this point I'm just taking any areas that I see some pooling, I will take those off. Okay, and then once I get it, you get it's kind of nice shiny coat. You've got to let that set off to the side for at least about 5 minutes or so before you do anything else. So it takes some time to dry. Now usually when I have it, when I get to where it's dry, what I'll do is, just before I put wax the wires in place, I'll add a very slight thin coat on to the tissue part into the palette that the acrylic's going to be, and this provides just that last little barrier, again making sure I have a really nice smooth surface that's going to be fitting up against that acrylic. So now once we've got the model Alcoated, and again you just when you put that thin coat on, it'll dry fairly rapidly. So generally what I'll do is, once I get that on, I'll then go ahead and the wires that I've bent, we want to wax those into place. So I use something that's called sticky wax, and that's actually, if you ever look in the order, that's actually what it's called, is sticky wax. So again, what I'm doing is, as I place the ball clasp into place, get into place, again just a little bit of sticky wax. You don't need a lot, you just want a little bit. The more you put on there, the more you're going to have to clean off. So again, I like to use just a little bit. That way your wax lasts a long time, but that's all you need. So at this point, we've got everything sticky wax. This is your last opportunity to really check, make sure you've got everything. Like right in here, you can see I didn't quite sticky wax that properly. So what I'm going to do, I'll go back in there. And I'll melt that sticky wax where I had it placed, reposition that wire. Always double check whatever you're doing. So again, now I look at there. Now I've got that much seated right where I want. I want to check everything, make sure everything's seated, wiring. So everything's good to go. Now we're ready to put some acrylic on the model. So we're going to go into the lab and we're going to do that. So right now we're going to get started on placing the acrylic on. One thing I am doing though is I'm filling my pressure pot with some warm water. I like that pot to be warm. So right now that's over in the sink. That's the sound that you hear. I just want it to get real warm and stuff. So while that's doing that, we're going to start putting the acrylic on. Basically you have two components, a powder, a liquid. Basically it's acrylic monomer. So what I do is, first I will take the liquid and I will wet things down. I'll just kind of wet the palette, and where I want it to be, I end up with a little pool in the palette. And then I will then take the powder and I will start kind of right at the edge of the tissue in the teeth, and I will slowly just place some powder right along the gingival margin on the lingual of all the teeth, and then I'll let that pool that I've got in the palette, I'll let that wick up and wet that powder, okay, till the powder is all wet. And then I'll come back and I'll place some more powder, and I want to get it to where it looks fairly dry. Then what I'm going to do is I'll take my finger and just lightly tamp it down. So what I'm doing is I'm just slightly compressing that. This really helps give you very dense acrylic. Now once from here on it's going to be just basically putting some liquid on, wetting the acrylic, getting it back to where it all looks nice and pink and all wet. There's no dry powder anywhere. I'll then come back and place a thin layer of powder. The reason I start up by the gingival margin is you know, everything's going to run down on the palette, so I really don't put a lot in the palette until I get towards the end. And even I'll take, as I pat it down, I'll take my finger and pull some of that powder back up into the sides of the palette, just like that. And again, it's just a process of constantly just wetting, more powder, wetting, more powder. And you want to go not real slow, but take your time. You really have several minutes before the acrylic is really going to be setting a lot. So again, you get it to where it's nice and wet. And again, I'm coming back, and as you can see, I'm constantly kind of putting the powder up, you know, just basically around right at the gingival margin of the teeth. I'm really not going into the roof of the mouth at all, into the palate, because again, I know gravity is going to help that acrylic just migrate its way down. And again, every time I apply the powder before I wet it again, I'm tamping that down, compressing it, making sure that we have a nice dense acrylic. And this is something that's not hard. You just want to take your time. By doing it this way, also it gives you an opportunity to get the right thickness. Because again, you want to make sure that the wires are covered, and you want to have at least probably about 2 millimeters of thickness. So as you can see, getting nice coverage. The wires are now completely covered. And also you can see I definitely have acrylic in the roof of the mouth, and I haven't put any powder there. Well, that's just because gravity and everything helps it flow down in there. So it's usually not a problem getting acrylic there. A lot of times the problem is keeping that acrylic up around the teeth. That's why you don't want to wet it too much. You want to basically wet it just enough just to wet the powder that you place. That is, as you can see, I'm just taking my time. It's drop by drop by drop by drop. I'm not streaming it on. Nice gentle drops, and you can see I'm not getting it to where it's going to flow. I want to just get it wet. So as you can see, I'm just taking my time, one drop at a time. You're not placing a lot on there, and you just got to look. Any place you see a little bit of white, that means you still have some dry powder. Now generally whenever I make a retainer, I always assume that we're going to have a bite plane on it. It's easier to cut the plastic away than try to add more after you've made them. So to me, it's, you know, most of the time when I'm making them, I do know if I'm going to have a bite plane or not. But if I don't, I always add one. So once I get to the point where I have my acrylic as thick as I kind of want it, and we're getting pretty close to that, I'm going to start adding my bite plane. And basically all that means is I'm just going to apply more powder into this anterior portion, right lingual to the anterior teeth from cuspid to cuspid. So you can see all I did was really add some here, and I'll now take my finger, making sure I'm not letting it migrate down, and again taking my finger, tamping it down, making kind of that bite plane. Come back, wet it up, and again here again you don't want to wet it so much that it's going to flow. You want to wet it just enough so you get rid of all the white. Again, you're coming back with your powder, and as you can see, I'm not adding a lot of powder. Again, I'm adding just enough so it dries that off, coming back and tamping. And I really think that, you know, this is really an important part about doing this, is pressing that powder and tamping it down. It gives you a very nice dense acrylic. So once I got that bite plane kind of where I want, I'll then come back, make sure I've got, again, I just do another little coverage around everything on the sides here. And as you can see, I've never really put any powder or anything in the roof of the mouth. Okay, I've always kept it up on the side, but as you can see, that's just gravity help the acrylic migrate down into the palette. So you're definitely going to get some coverage there. So I'm getting real close to where, hey, we're about done with this. Again, I'm going to just wet this up, and as you can see when I'm wetting it, again, you want to take your time. As you see, I don't use a lot of the liquid at this point, just drop by drop. Especially as you get towards the end, you really want to make sure you're not getting anything flowing out of the palette. Any spots that I see that I may feel to add more, I'll just dab a little powder in there, tamp it down, come back. But you can see I'm taking my time. It's just little bits at a time. Little bits at a time. But you also want to keep working on it. You don't want to take it too slow. Now once I kind of got it where I want, you just check, make sure, hey, acrylic's where I want. At this point now it's ready to go into the pressure pot. So I'm going to go over and get the pressure pot. So I've been letting the pressure pot sit in some hot water flow through it. So actually, if you feel the pressure pot's warm. I'm then going to take my retainer, put it inside the pressure pot, put the cover on. Kind I use, it's the style where it has this clamp on top. Some look like a cooker pressure pot. Basically screw this down real tight. Now I'm going to go ahead and fill this up with some air. You want I put it up to just below 40. This actually has a relief valve that'll only let it go up to 40. So I put it on just under 40. If you don't have a line that you can pump it up, you can use a bicycle pump. That's what I use in my one office. I don't have a connection, so I have a bicycle pump that I can easily pump this up. So again, you got a couple different ways you can pump this up. Now I want to let this set now in here for at least 5 minutes. I like it in there for about 5-6 minutes. And then once it's done in 6 minutes, we're going to take it out, put it in some warm water, put it back in here. Now that we've let this sit in here about 5-6 minutes, so what I'm going to do is relieve the pressure, open this back up. Now we have basically, you can see how now it's, it's kind of like a rubbery hardness. I can take my fingernail still, kind of push it in there a little bit. Now you can see even here, boy, I didn't probably put enough liquid there, so we got a little bit of kind of excess powder and stuff. So what I want to do now is I'll take this over to the sink. And ideally, if you can use really, really hot water, like about 180 degree water. In my office, I have a hot water tap for making instant coffee. I'll use that. But again, you want to have this where it's as warm as you can. So what I'll do is, I'll now put that model in some water. I come back over to the pressure pot. Put it inside the pressure pot. Again, seal it up and apply pressure. By doing this, it really gives you a very, very dense acrylic. And again, I'm going to pressurize this up. I mean, it's, when you make dentures, or when the lab makes dentures, again, they're going to put that denture in a flask, seal it up, put pressure on it, put it in some boiling water and cook it. And that is actually what we're doing here. We're basically letting that acrylic get super hard. Now I'm going to leave this, I like to leave it in here ideally, 15-20 minutes, okay, because that really gives it the opportunity for its final set. After about 15-20 minutes, the retainer is going to be ready to take out, and then we'll trim it up. So now we've had this cook in here. I always like about 15-20 minutes. We've been in there about 25. You can leave it in overnight. I've done that. But you want at least about 15-20 minutes to get that curing. So now when you're ready, again, relieve the pressure. Undo the top. take it out. So now here, if you can test it, yeah, boy, nice hard acrylic. In fact, you can really see how transparent that is. That's one of the first things you really want to look at, making sure there's really no bubbles. We really can clearly see the wires and stuff through there. Looks good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my lab knife. And so to take the acrylic off now, because it's really kind of, you know, ended all the little undercuts and stuff, what I'll do is I'll take my lab knife and kind of work from the back, just getting up underneath. And if you put enough Alcoat on there, it really should pop just right off. So now again, you can check and see how that is. Boy, nice dense acrylic, really see no porosity in the acrylic at all. Really looks good. So now what we want to do is we want to trim all this flash off. Again, so because you don't want that, so we're going to go ahead and trim it. How we do that? Basically, you use an acrylic burr. Generally, you can use a slow speed handpiece if you're doing this at the chair side. I like to do in the lab because you see there's going to be a lot of power, a lot of dust and stuff. So what I do is I'll start and basically taking off all the flash. And what I want to do is take off it, but leave about 2 millimeters that's going to be up on the tooth. Okay, you don't want to take this all the way down to the gingival margin. You want to leave a little bit of that acrylic that's resting up on the tooth. So, and right in here you got to be careful. You don't want to nick the wires. So you just really want to gently go in there, remove that. And here across the front, here I'm just going to lightly just kind of, again, take some of that flash off. But then I'll come back here and just smooth down that bite plane. Again, you don't want to do a lot at this point. You just want to kind of get rid of, you know, some of the bulk. And here on the anterior, I'm definitely going to go in and take off any of the acrylic that was interproximal. Okay, we don't need that. And again, that'll just be an irritant for the patient. So I really smooth that off so there's really nothing going in proximal. And again, taking off that flash that's on the occlusal surface of the posterior teeth, the bicuspids and the molars. And the other thing I want to do is right where we have the acrylic goes interproximal on the posterior, you want to make sure that's not a pointy thing. You want to kind of just blunt that off. And here again, I'm coming in just making sure that acrylic is still up on the tooth, but again, you want to, and then I'll come back in and just create just a kind of little hollow out. Again, you don't want that a big bulk acrylic up on the lingual surface of those teeth, just because it'll be a little more of an irritant to the patient. Then I'll come back in and I'm going to trim the posterior. I generally will not have the second molars in my retainers. If I do, I'll make sure I put more acrylic back there. The other thing I like to do is I like to remove as much as I can from the palate. I really don't want this going that far posteriorly, just because, you know, if you got somebody that has a gag reflex, you know, that can be really an impediment for them wearing this. So that's why I really tend to like to take and smooth this down and really kind of cut that back as much as I can. And then on the back there, again, you want to get it almost to a knife edge on the posterior. You don't want a big ledge back there, because it's just going to irritate people. You know, the tongue will feel that. So at this point, you're just looking at creating just nice, smooth, rounded surfaces. Try not to have any points. Also, at this point, if you've had any blebs or stuff, you can go in there and just gently take down that surface a little bit, get rid of any little defects that may have occurred. So again, once I get to that point, I'll go back to my lab knife and I'll just make sure I've got everything out. And then I always have these little bits of acrylic right around the class. I simply will just take my knife and just trim those off. Again, you want so that wire is nice and clean where it comes out of the acrylic. So again, all I'm doing is taking off all that little bits of flash that's right around those wires, so it doesn't go on interproximally. Now I won't do any more adjustment to the bite plane because I'll do that clinically while I go in. But again, I'll come back once I've cleaned it and just do any little bit of touching. Like right in here, I've got kind of this sharp edge. What I like to do is take and round that off. Again, you got to think about, you know, of what that person's tongue's going to be feeling when they're wearing it. So that's why you really want to take any little sharp edges, any little thing that could be poking, and trim that off. So at that point, pretty much got most of the lab work done. And then, you know, basically you can just double check things. So as you can see, you put it back on the model. Boy, everything's trimmed nice all around. It's really got, but again, you want to make sure that acrylic is up on that tooth surface. Okay, so at this point, we're ready to deliver this. I will go ahead and adjust my bite plane clinically using some articulating. You really want at least 4, 5, 6 contacts along here, and you want it bilateral. You don't want it hitting on just one side. The last thing I'll do once I get that bite plane adjusted, I'll come back in the lab with some very fine pumice and polish this up so it has kind of a real nice smooth satin finish. And then you're ready to deliver it to the patient.